First, just 20 hours after Labor was basking in the victory of getting its carbon tax through the Parliament, it's now tasting defeat with its so-called Malaysia solution for asylum seekers in tatters. The government now expects an increase in boat arrivals. It's still committed to mandatory detention, but when detention centres fill up, asylum seekers will be housed in the community. The Prime Minister's blaming Tony Abbott for this enforced policy backflip, but as political editor Chris Ullman reports, some of her own team are delighted by the shift because they're deeply critical of the way she's handled asylum policy.
Politics is about leadership.
Order, the car is to come to order.
And some of Julia Gillard's strength was on display this week, with the carbon tax passing the lower house.
The Prime Minister.
But the very next day raised questions about the Prime Minister's judgment.
They want to deny this country the ability to process asylum seekers offshore.
Managing expectations is high on the list of the arts of politics, and today there was a compelling reason to believe that there would be a debate on a controversial bill to allow the offshore processing of asylum seekers.
We will bring this legislation to the Parliament. Tony Abbott and every member of the Liberal Party and National Party should walk into the Parliament and have their vote recorded so that the pages of history can show that when they were called on to choose between this nation's interests in protecting our borders and their narrow political interest, they chose their narrow political interest. They should record their votes, name by name, person by person.
It is listed for further debate on Thursday. That is our intention.
There were 5 good reasons why bringing this bill to the House was a bad idea. First, it never for a moment bothered anyone in the coalition that the pages of history would record them as having opposed this bill.
I don't believe it's the opposition's duty to provide a blank cheque to a bad government.
Second, it really does bother a good chunk of Labor's caucus that their names would be in history's page alongside a policy they hate.
I don't believe you should be cruel to people who are fleeing war, who are fleeing terrorism, who are fleeing violence.
Third, the bill was always doomed to be defeated in the Senate.
The Prime Minister is wrong. She is seriously wrong.
Fourth, getting it through the lower house hung on the vote of a West Australian National MP who sits on the crossbench.
I will be supporting the opposition amendments today.
Finally, if the bill failed to win the support of the lower house, it would be the first time in more than 80 years that had happened. And in 1929, the Bruce government resigned. There'd be no need for the Gillard government to follow suit, but the coalition was always going to play a lost vote as a de facto no-confidence motion.
She is scared of putting her legislation to this Parliament because she is scared that this Parliament will no longer support her.
Labor's misjudgments on border protection have a rich history, but its recent past is simply bewildering. After the High Court junked its plan to send 800 asylum seekers to Malaysia, the government decided to legislate its way around the problem. But the Greens are implacably opposed to offshore processing, so the success of that move hung on getting the coalition to back the government. Now, in case you've been asleep for much of the last 2 years, here's the one thing the government really wants you to know about Tony Abbott.
And those opposite, of course, said no, 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 no and no.
So, at a critical juncture on a crucial weakness, Julia Gillard put her hopes in the opposition leader breaking what she would have us believe is the habit of a lifetime.
Surely, but what if he says no?
Well, I'm going to keep putting that position to the Leader of the Opposition.
But it looks likely that he will say no, and you must have a fallback position.
First things first, it's a matter for the Leader of the Opposition and his judgment.
If your amendments fail, will you support the government's?
No, we won't.
This morning, the government lost its last hope when Tony Crook said he would not support the government's amendment to the migration law.
I'm not killing anything off. It's a position for the government and the opposition to sort out. They both support offshore processing. There is a very, very fine line between the two of these two positions. To suggest that I'm the one killing off offshore processing is blatantly wrong.
But the bill was listed to be debated today, and finally it seems to have dawned on the government that losing this vote would be bad, so it started to manipulate the program to ensure the bill didn't get debated.
Leader of Government Business in the House.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. I move that Main Committee Orders of the Day number 6 relating to a national standard for fertiliser products.
Fertiliser comes in many forms. The government explained that the reason for the change of plans was that the opposition had too many speakers.
The opposition has around 30 speakers listed for the debate. I presume he would be interested in listening to their contributions.
Behind the scenes, Labor was pedalling fast. It called an emergency caucus meeting and told members that it was essentially moving to onshore processing.
If we do see more boats, then we may have to confront the circumstance, indeed it's quite likely we will have to confront the circumstance of how we manage the mandatory detention network under increasing pressure.
And so, kicking and screaming and losing an enormous amount of political capital on the way, the government has arrived at a policy that many of its own members have wanted for 4 years.